Hi, this is Gary Snyder, and this is the SnydeReport podcast. Yes, your favorite newsletter is now on camera, talking to you live, depending on where you're at. But we're going to start doing these interviews not only on a daily basis, but maybe a weekly, monthly, but we'll see. But what we want to do here with the SnydeReport podcast is bring you the people in the news that you want to talk to, and maybe in a way that you don't always get from them. So to start us off, our first guest is Indianapolis City-County Councilman Jess. Is it Jess or Jesse?
Jesse, please, but you can call me Jesse.
Jesse Brown. Yeah, I have a son-in-law named Jess. So, I wish I had Jesse's girl. So we always use that as a metaphor for my daughter.
Right. That was a top hit at our wedding, me and my wife. So
was it? So, Jesse, the reason I brought you on here is because you're doing things down in Indianapolis that isn't necessarily to the norm of what people usually expect down there. You make headlines. You seem to ruffle a few feathers. And from someone setting up here in the northeastern part of Indiana, we love what you're doing. At least I do. My wife does. She's usually she will be on these podcasts with me, just not today. But before we get going, why don't you just take a few minutes, tell people about yourself, who Jesse Brown is?
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. And thanks again for having me on, Gary. Yeah, so I am just a guy, right? So I'm not some magical politician who's got the world's worst background or the world's best. I just happen to be a person who's been in a position in my life to see people doing really well, people doing really poorly, and watch how more and more of them fall into that second category rather than the first. So, I was lucky enough, single mom, raising 3 kids. We had it a little bit rough growing up. She was divorced from my dad, who just 2 years ago died of an overdose. We don't know if it was intentional suicide or just a drug issue, but either way, he's no longer with us, and left me a book and a broken pair of glasses was all he had to his name when he died. So I didn't have things the easiest, but I've always done very well at standardized tests, got to go to Cathedral High School on academic scholarships, and so got to see, how the at least upper middle class live. Nobody was Jeff Bezos there at Cathedral, but they certainly had it easier than I had growing up. And I got to see that there were some good people and some people who were making mistakes among my rich kid friends, just like there were among the poor kids that I used to hang out with. And so it became more and more obvious as I was growing up that, work ethic or, personal values or anything else wasn't the primary determiner of how things were working out. You could instead look at big economic trends, right? And so, I was 37 years old, I think, when I got elected. I'd been knocking doors, helping candidates, and I've always voted Democrat my entire life, even though I've always considered myself kind of a radical lefty. But I didn't know how many other people agreed with me, and so just decided to be as honest as I could when I ran for office. And I said, been voted Democrat my entire life, and things are actually still getting worse in this state. Granted, Democrats don't have a ton of power in this state, but I don't see them fighting back. I don't see them representing me. I don't see a competing vision for what should happen in this state. It's always just feels like Republican light. And, so I just decided I would run for office. I didn't think I could win. I was going up against the pretty well-respected, I thought, vice president of the City-County Council. He had $75,000 in his campaign finance account before I knew how to open a campaign finance account. I didn't get a single dime from a single organization. It was all small dollar donors, but I just knocked a lot of doors, was super honest, talked with people, and I found out most of my neighbors feel the same way I do, and quite strongly about it, in fact. So much so, when I won my election in the primary, I won by 12%. And then when I won in the general election, I won by the widest margin of any contested election of any city councilor. Again, as a total outsider, not knowing what I was doing, didn't have a media strategy team other than like my wife. My sister-in-law designed my business cards and my logo. It was very grassroots, very neighborhood-oriented, and that's how I came to be a politician.
I too was a product of a single mother, me and my 2 brothers, at least for a while. And I can guarantee you that most people raised, at least for a part of the time, by a single mother has a great single mother story to tell. Yes. Mine was, we would wait for support checks each week from my dad. And if they came in the mail, my mom would take us to the movie. And and she drove an old Volkswagen Bug that would not start. So the only way she could get it started was to have her 3 little boys push it and pop the clutch. That's how we got to the movies. And it wasn't bad because we lived in a trailer park at the time. And so seeing a car being pushed and someone popping the clutch in the mid 70s was nothing new or not that embarrassing because it was kind of regular around there.
Sure.
But once you got to the movies and had to leave, that was a completely different story.
Right.
So let's hear your single mom story that you remember from your childhood.
Yeah, well, I just remember, she was lucky enough. She was able to get her parents to help co-sign on a house when she bought one. So I grew up in Irvington, just south of Ellenberger Park, if anybody's from Indianapolis and knows that area, which is a nice historic area. So she bought a house that was built in 1908, and we still had steam heat and pipes. The last 2 owners had jerry-rigged the electric a couple different times. So I remember being a kid and just watching electricians come in and try to fix something, look at what we had set up and just like, you could not pay me enough money to touch this. I don't have enough liability insurance. So just remembering my mom putting on a brave face and doing everything she could to try to we're going to be fine. Don't worry about it, kids. And then I would catch her crying over the bills at night when she thought we'd all gone to bed. So yeah, it's just, I don't have any kids myself. My wife and I can take care of our house and watch some dogs, but I just can't even imagine how much strength it took to do that.
Well, Jesse, you talk about running for office. You beat what I thought was almost an impossible candidate to beat down there in Zach Adamson. But talk a few minutes about what made Jesse Brown decide to take on Zach Adamson, a stalwart in Indianapolis politics, and what made you think you could win? And at what point did you think, hey, maybe I can win this?
Yeah. So when I decided to start running for office, I'll admit that I paid a lot more attention to the state house than to the city-county council. And so I knocked a bunch of doors for Dr. Victoria Garcia Wilburn. I had done a lot, state house work over the last couple of years, but I hadn't paid too much attention to the council other than to know that my current counselor actually, it was before redistricting, was Jason Larison, who I've since met and is a very nice guy, can get a beer with, great guy to talk with. But he was caucused in by the Marion County Democratic Party precinct committee people. He never went through an election, and so he never knocked doors. I'd never met him. I'd heard his name and seen him in the news, but had never heard from him or knew what he was working on. And so I thought, oh, maybe I'd actually be able to run against this guy. And I'd started thinking about it. I was like, you know what, maybe I should run for office. And I psyched myself up a little bit until somebody was like, hey, buddy, you should look because redistricting happened. And this year, there's going to be brand new boundaries. You're not going against Jason Larison. You're going against Zach Adamson. And I was like, well, Zach had been a hero of mine. He was one of the first out gay men who served in municipal government in the state. He was always a progressive icon. I've always held my nose and voted. I always wish people were further to the left, more progressive, more Bernie Sanders style, which we don't get a lot of opportunities to vote that way in Indiana. Zach was one of the people I was most proud of voting for in the past. I didn't agree with him on every single issue. He had sponsored a bill at the city council that I think still criminalized homelessness. And there were a couple other just policy issues where I thought, he was not on the right side. But in general, my hope after I realized who I was going to be running against, I was like, okay, well, I can't possibly win, but at least maybe I could be a progressive challenger that shows him you don't need to always moderate and just join your other counselors to the right. You, in fact, have a reason to be pulled to the left, and there's constituents who want you to be doing that. And I just decided I was not going to run negative ads. I was not going to attack Zach or anything like that. I didn't think he deserved it, but I was going to fight as hard as I could to connect with my neighbors, meet people, and just promise to be a good representative for them. So I'm a member of Democratic Socialists of America, and I'm a Democratic Socialist myself. I wear this pin in homage to Eugene V. Debs, who is one of my political heroes. He's a Hoosier hero. And so I had connections with a lot of activists and socialists. And so I asked everybody, hey, if you're interested in trying to break up the status quo and knock some doors with me, I would love any and all help. And I was really, a lot of people were not DSA members when I first reached out, but liked what I was doing and ended up joining the organization. Ended up having 70 people knock doors. We got, 243 unique individual campaign contributions. So we raised about $24,000, which I never in my life thought that I could raise that much money just from, $10, $20 at a time for people. And I was getting really, really positive responses from the doors, and so people were, because we went back, right? We knocked the door. People said, I don't know what I'm thinking about so far. we'd come back 3 weeks later and say, hey, have you thought about it? Because we still want to know what's important to you so that we can represent you well. People really liked that. So yeah, I was getting all of my numbers said that I was sailing towards an easy victory. And I just assumed I must be running the numbers wrong. I'm not a politician. I've never done this before. Got to be something wrong. There's no way this is real. And so I went to the John Bonner Center, was the polling place I stood outside of on election day for the primary. And I'd been telling people all day, hey, come give me a high five and then meet me at the Mayfair tap room just a half a block away where I'm going to have my little watch party afterwards. And, the room ended up being full of about, I want to say 75 people who came out wanted to watch the city council watch race, which I was not expecting. And within about an hour of the polls closing, people were saying, hey, you won. I said, no, I don't, I'm not going to psych myself into believing this. It's early. I'm not just do projections. They're like, I don't know how well you understand math, but based on the precincts that are in, it's impossible for you to lose. And I still was like, nope, don't want to think about that. I don't believe it's true. It'll finally like, hey, people are going to want to speak sometime soon. So I ran to the bathroom of the pub and was composing on my phone a victory speech because I hadn't let myself believe it was really going to happen until that point. Yeah, so really kind of a magical night. I was as shocked as anybody. Very much the dog that caught the mail van. Yeah, but I'm taking it very seriously. I quit my day job. I'm doing this as a full-time gig and just working every day to try to represent my constituents well.
Now, I'm looking at your setup in the background. Do you play the banjo?
I have aspirations to play the banjo. So I'm slowly teaching myself the finger rolls, etc. It's a 5-string. It's going slow. I picked up the ukulele, which you also see behind me, because I had tried for years to learn guitar. And when I told people, I've been trying to learn guitar for 4 years, and then they'd listen to me sadly pluck out a couple songs, they'd be like, 4 years, huh? And so I figured people are less familiar with ukulele, and it's only got 4 strings. So when I'm pretty bad at it, people won't judge me as much. So I enjoy playing ukulele quite a bit. Banjo, I'm still learning.
All right, so you win the primary, you're elected to the Indianapolis City-County Council. I assume that it's a heavily Democrat district.
Yes.
So did you even have a primary or a general election opponent?
No Republican ran. There was a very nice woman named Libby Glass who ran as a Libertarian. She didn't get a ton of money. I think Jefferson Shreve gave her a little bit just to try to run up some conservative votes. She ran a very principled campaign. Neither of us attacked each other. We actually stood in front of the same polling place all day on election day saying, hey, we have different political ideas, but the other person is a good person who we trust to be like a solid leader. So that was really, I think, not the norm in Indiana politics lately. It was really refreshing.
Now that you're on the City-County Council, at least from where I'm sitting, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I have been a few times, was there just immediate friction with the rest of your city-county councilmen and women, or is this something that you've done, something that you were perceived to have done? How did all this friction start that leads us to where we are now, you being kicked out of the Democrat caucus in the Indianapolis City-County Council?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I received feedback early on because I did not have any personal relationship with any city-county councilor, hadn't had a one-on-one conversation with Zach Adamson even prior to running, and I didn't even understand that in the political culture here, that was considered a slap in the face. And so I had been a real jerk by not trying to sit down with him and have coffee. I get that now. At the time, I was like, why would I mean, I gave 20,000 people my cell phone number when I was knocking doors and talking with people. You can get a hold of me if you want to chat, but I'm thinking it's the voters who get to talk, not us at this point. But so I had a couple unintentional slights that just came from me not being a political insider. And then, Zach had a lot of deep relationships with a lot of my peers on the council. And so because I had not done things the right way, waiting my turn and, trying to talk quietly before running a primary challenge, I was seen as this disruptor who maybe was dangerous for the Democratic Party, or at least dangerous for the people on the council. Even though I hadn't run a campaign really attacking Zach as a person, I did very aggressively go after some of the policies that Democrats had proposed or had failed to push on. And so I think, and I ran very openly that I was going to be a champion for transparency and accountability in government. And frankly, I don't mean to impugn anyone's character, but I think that others thought that what looks like transparency and accountability to an outsider might not feel that same way to them, and that I could just, disrupt things quite a bit.
So
I got pretty early. Say again?
So you pissed them off.
I pissed him off. I wasn't trying to piss him off, but I absolutely pissed him off. Just chose a strategy on social media. Again, I was doing this on a $0 budget. I've always been like probably to my detriment on social media too often, but I don't delete tweets, even the ones that make me look bad and dumb. I just figure I'm a human being and I'm not always going to be right, but I want to engage with people, even people who disagree with me. So you could probably find thousands of back and forths with kind of 3-follower Republican trolls where I just am like, tell me, okay, you like capitalism better than socialism? Let's talk about it. Who should I read? Can I read a book to see your point of view? And also some clapbacks and, some very aggressive commentary on what was going on. The week after the primary, or less than a week after the primary, it was announced that the city of Indianapolis was going to help take over the financing and development of the Signia Hotel, which is a new Hilton hotel down by the convention center, to the tune of $800 million that were going to be revenue bonds owned by the taxpayers. And so this came out the Friday after the Tuesday, which was the primary election. And so I immediately kind of put everyone on blast and said, this is horrific. How is there an $800 million decision that our constituents should get to weigh in on that was intentionally hidden from them until after they get a chance to vote? If it's a good deal, why not just explain it to people and trust people to know what's right? I made a bunch of noise about that and just how really anti-democratic this was and not transparent. Once I sat through the committee meetings and saw how the deal would work and saw that revenue bonds have less impact on the fiscal stability and the credit rating of the city. And again, I'm a socialist, so the city owning a hotel isn't actually that terrible of an idea to me. We get more influence over whether we get a union in that hotel. We get revenues that come in. So I actually didn't hate it and told my followers, hey, despite me making a big stink about this, I think I probably would have voted for it. Didn't get that vote, of course. But I think the fact that I immediately proceeded to do the exact thing I said, which was push for accountability and transparency, further freaked out some of the existing people. Again, I don't want to make it out like anybody is just an evil person. They're just used to a political culture where the mayor is extremely powerful here in Indianapolis. And if you embarrass him, often bad things can happen to you, whether it's just a donor stop talking with you, or you get a primary challenger, or you stop getting early advice about what things are coming down the pipe. And so, I think the fear was going to mess up a stable, if not perfectly, it was maybe dysfunctional, but it was at least a stable system that they knew how to work within. They worried I was going to rock the boat, mess everything up, and then they'll lose even that little ability to influence policy.
So what led you from maybe just ruffling a few feathers to being kicked out of the Democrat caucus? Because where I'm sitting up here in Northeast Indiana, it seems like you did piss people off and they hold grudges. And just reading some of the articles, and we've had some of these articles in the SnydeReport newsletter, which is Indiana's most read newsletter, by the way. Just get the plug in there.
Yeah, to do it.
IPS schools came up. So how does that intertwine everything that led to the vote of your fellow Democrats saying, and I'll preface this by saying, in a state where there are so few Democrats, they decided that you were not good enough to be part of their clique.
Yep, that's right. Yeah. And so I guess the history there. So before I even was sworn in, caucus leadership and council leadership came to me and said, hey, some of our peers, and it's not us, don't worry, it's not us, it was them. But they said it was some peers who did not want me.
If they say it's not us, it's them.
Always. But so they said that there were some peers who did not want me to even join the Democratic caucus because the word socialism in my social media and described that as my politics. I said, well, I am a socialist, didn't hide that. My constituents knew that when they voted me in. And again, they voted me in by the widest margin of any contested election. Also pretty high turnout, higher than expected. When I was crunching all the numbers, and the few dollars I spent on strategy were spent on people who were good at using Van to look at the voter file and predict how many people are going to turn out. The win number, so in other words, the number of votes I thought it would take to get 51% and win the primary was 1,000. I ended up getting 1,700 votes, and my opponent got 1,200. So we had far more turnout than we were expecting, I think, because people were energized. I brought all this up. I said, I literally never voted third party. I don't think I've ever missed a primary. I was a dreadlocked activist in high school who called myself an anarchist. I still voted for John Kerry because I hated the Iraq War so much, which thank you for your service, by the way. But, just briefly, I been consistent and I'm not misleading my constituents, they know who I am and they voted for me. So I think they expect me to be seated as a Democrat, which is how I ran. And yeah, there's some pushback to that, but they finally realized they didn't really have much of an argument for that. And so at my very first caucus meeting, which was before I was sworn in, one of my peers boycotted that meeting because he felt so strongly that I shouldn't be seated. So it's not as though, we started on a detente and then from there I pissed people off. They were pissed off before I met.
Which city councilman was that?
That was Leroy Robinson. I had texted him 3 different times saying, hey, Mr. Chairman, I would love to just better understand what's your politics, where you're coming from, what's important to you. I want to try to work with you anytime I can. And if we have to disagree, I don't want to fight you head on. I want to let you fight on your issues and I'll pick a different lane. 3 different times I reached out to him offering to buy a beverage and just get to know each other. And it wasn't until months later that he confirmed, I read your messages. I just don't think you were worthy of a response. So that's one of his peers, one of his 18 peers on the council. And I did not go public with that. I think that's pretty damning. I think his constituents would have been frustrated with that. But again, I was trying to work quietly and I was like, okay, I know there's this lack of trust and you don't know who I am. And so I have to prove myself and that's fine. And for the same reason, I didn't kick up a stink when committee assignments came out. Committee assignments are determined by 3 people, the Republican minority leader, the Democratic majority leader, and the president of the council. So that'd be Bob Osley, Maggie Lewis, and at the time it was Brian Mallory. Now it's Michael Paul Hart. But so that's 2 votes out of 3 are Democrats. Right now, and as it has been for the last 14 months, there is no Republican city county councilor who sits on fewer than 6 committees. I was only ever given 3. I quit my day job so I could do this full time, and I was still given half as many committees as the Republican with the fewest.
And the reasoning was?
We don't trust you. We don't like you yet. And I kept quiet about it.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like they've liked you at all.
No, they've demonstrably not liked me and have tried to put up roadblocks every chance they could. Which, again, I thought was their prerogative. They've been in politics a long time. Maybe they knew something I didn't. Maybe I was going to mess things up.
Selfies.
I agree with that, but I was trying to, let's hear them out and figure out their side. But so there were a few different things that really, I think, pissed them off and bothered them over the 14 months. One was kind of a big public stink where Senator Aaron Freeman from the State House was pushing a bill to try to kill the Blue Line, which represented a massive, probably the biggest infrastructure project in the 4 years I'm going to be in that'll go through my district, represent $150 million in federal funding that was coming in. And he was trying to kill it because allegedly,
has anyone told Freeman that if he wants to be an Indianapolis City-County councilman or mayor, he should run for that? And if not, just keep his nose out of trying to run Indianapolis?
Yeah. And, I met the guy, actually. I did a lot of work campaigning for Katrina Owens, who was his challenger this last fall. She didn't do all that well. It was a tough year for Democrats all across the state. But I actually spent Election Day last year standing in front of the Franklin Township Town Center, where I spent a little bit of time with Senator Freeman and a lot of time, believe it or not, with his parents who came in from out of town to support him, which, just as a quick aside, his mother should be getting $1 million a year for how great she is at campaigning, just shaking people's hands and be like, let me tell you about my son. Look at the picture of my grandkids, really tug on the heartstrings. So anyway, that was a funny little aside with Freeman.
Maybe $1 million a year for putting up with him.
That too. I was trying to be nice, but I'll let you be the guy this time. But so anyway, I had pushed very publicly against him and started raising money to try to encourage a challenger to run against him, and he wouldn't run unopposed. I tried to get volunteers lined up, and my peers told me in no uncertain terms this was a terrible idea because the best thing we could do is just hide our heads in the sand and not say a word during State House session, because Republican legislators are vindictive and they might make things worse just to punish us for speaking up. And I pretty explicitly and publicly responded to that by saying, I've looked at your strategy, which is just to stay quiet and try not to fight back. And I've watched Democrats lose and lose and lose and get a smaller and smaller chunk of the electorate. Why would we not try something new?
At what point can it not get worse?
Exactly.
The old saying is, never say it can't get any worse, because it can. But at this point, you've pretty much hit rock bottom, not only in Indianapolis, but across the state.
That's certainly how I feel. And, what their answer to that would be is, it's funny. My wife is she's my unpaid political strategist for now, and also an attorney.
My wife is mine.
We're just the pretty faces, right?
I know.
But so my wife has corrected the way I've talked about this. And the way she would say it is there's a fringe right-wing conspiracy belief that because Indianapolis is not mentioned specifically in the Indiana State Code, the legislature could just dissolve the city and rule by fiat. And the problem is that there are fringe right-wing conspiracy theorists who occupy the supermajority of our state house. And so they very well might try to do that and have right away in. And so
and I wouldn't be shocked, because when you take a look at the state now, they have super majorities. They've been in control of every single thing for the last 15 years. And, if they wanted to kick out every single Democrat out of the Indiana Senate and House, they could do that.
Yeah. And they'd still have...
That's how low that we have fallen here in Indiana.
Exactly right. But from my perspective, you look at Marion County in particular, where our turnout is abysmal. It's worse than the state, which is already one of the worst states in the country. And my contention is people don't vote even for the Democratic leadership in Marion County because they frankly don't see much of a difference. They think that the policies passed by both parties are about the same anyway, so why stand in line for 3 hours for early voting? Just skip it, and whatever happens, it'll be about the same. And so I think, the best way you stand up to a bully is you sock him in the eye, and maybe you get your butt kicked and you end up bleeding on the ground, but at least the bully has to suffer something for just taking their lunch day. So I thought even if they try to overextend their hand and dissolve the city government or something like that, that's what it would take to actually rally voters to resist this, because what we've done so far just seems like it's clearly not working.
No,
so,
you look, you got Braun and QAnon Beckwith, and you can go up and down the government on a federal level, on a state level here in Indiana, and God, it's embarrassing.
Agreed. It's embarrassing and devastating to many of our neighbors and friends, Yeah, so I think that we have to do something, not just because we'll never change this until it ends, but because it's getting really bad. And, people mocked me quite a bit before the election for saying the word fascism about, the Trump administration. Right now, a lot fewer people are mocking me after we're seeing what Elon Musk is doing and just the kind of just crazy stuff. They're just dissolving things, ignoring the Constitution. And so I just do think we really need to get people politically engaged and fight back. So that came to a head in February of last year, so 12 months ago at this point. There was a vote to expel me from the caucus then, and I survived by one vote. So it was almost deadlocked vote. I barely survived. Frankly, I think it was intended that I would survive that vote, and it would just, put the fear of God in me. But so I said, hey, I want to be a better colleague. Let me know, because people were like, oh, your social media, you shouldn't critique Joe Biden. You shouldn't critique the mayor. You shouldn't call it out when DPW is not doing a good job on our streets. You have to pretend like things are great because we have to make our party look good. I was like, well, I think people aren't fooled by that. And it just makes us look out of touch when we don't understand how people are feeling and talking about it over their beers or their coffee. But I can try to be nicer. I won't call people out by name. I won't, I can try to be more supportive publicly, because I do think some of you are doing really good things that I want to support. Tried to earn back some trust and spent a long time doing it. One thing that caused a bunch of friction was people came up to me because I gave a speech in October of 2023 saying we need to stop the war between Israel and Gaza, and we need to stop arming Israel in the meantime. And so I felt very strongly about that issue. That's been about the 90% consensus from my constituents who've talked to me about it. It's not a contentious issue at all. It's like less contentious than immigrant rights or trans rights or other things that the Democrats on the council do thankfully stand up for. When people from the beginning asked me to bring a ceasefire resolution to the council, I said, I'm not sure that that's appropriate because it's a municipal government. It'll just be words on a paper. It doesn't do anything. And also, I really am not sure my peers are going to stand for this. And so one person out of 25 is not going to be able to move this. So if you really want this to get done, start a petition and show my peers that there are voters who are paying attention. And so they got hundreds of signatures. And I was like, okay, well, I sort of feel like I made a commitment. I'll agree to sponsor this and introduce it. I have yet to see the 170 cities in the United States pass a ceasefire resolution. I believe the language I introduced was the most moderate out of any of those. And yet I could not get a second on the motion. And I've written publicly about it, but my peers used a lot of just procedural rules to stop it from ever going on the agenda, which caused protesters to get more and more frustrated and more upset. Then they came and started participating in public comment, and the council president started shutting off their comment based on the content which is like a pretty clear First Amendment violation, which also upset people and got them even more rowdy and angry. And then finally, in November, tabled the resolution never to hear it again in a room full of, like Arab scholars and activists, Jewish Voice for Peace. Like a ton of people had come knowing it probably wouldn't pass, but at least they would watch the end of it. And it was just like tabled without any public comment. And so very frustrating for me. Again, I was working really hard quietly behind the scenes. I met with the Jewish Community Resource Center. I tried to meet with everybody I could in the city who had any thoughts about it to try to find a compromise and a consensus. My peers did not see it that way. I think thought I was just bringing this to politically embarrass them. I honestly did not know that they would be so resistant to this. Again, most Democrats our size, did this. But for some of my peers, it was seen as a sign that I'm just a wrecker who's trying to ruin things or ruin their political careers, as opposed to just, I could demonstrate, I could show you all the emails and phone calls I've gotten. My constituents want me to do this. I think we at least owe it a hearing. So that was a big thing. But then more importantly, I think they have just been embarrassed by some of my calls for transparency and accountability. I still believe I'm the only elected official in Indiana who has called for Mayor Joe Hogsett to resign over the Thomas Cook situation. I've met Thomas several times. He was the most unrepentant, brash, I'm never going to get any comeuppance guy I think I've ever met in my life. And just as all the data came out about how many times some of the victims had come to Joe Hogsett personally to talk to him about it, and he just brushed it under the rug, I thought that was incredibly damning and would be ruinous to us as Democrats if we were seen to be tarnished with that. And so I called for him to resign. My peers did finally agree to an investigative committee after I pushed very hard from the inside and quietly. That they did not see fit to have me join that investigative committee, even though I think I was the only Democrat who had no financial relationship with Joe Hogsett. But again, from their perspective, I had already biased myself and shown that I wasn't going to be a fair arbiter. I disagree, but I understand the theory. But then the real issues that kind of took things to a head here recently were with IPS specifically. So Democrats in Indianapolis are very split between those who are taking a lot of money from charter school influencers like the Mind Trust, Rise Indy, Stand for Children. There's several of these big billionaire-funded institution.
Let me interrupt here real quick. Sure. They're split, or is it just maybe the elected officials are split? Because from where I sit, and the people that I hang with, and the people that I talk to, it's not evenly split. It's the Republicans and charter schools are trying to kill public education, and they're going to use IPS as a guinea pig to do that.
That's exactly right. That is exactly right. And I'd say probably 90% of my constituents favor public education and oppose charters, even though there are some excellent charter schools in my district. There's a couple of Paramount schools I've toured the buildings. Their administrator, Tommy Reddix, has given me a tour. I told Tommy the one in Brookside in particular is the coolest school building I've ever been inside of my life. I'm not going to lie about that. But what I told him was, I can't support you anyway because you are complicit in breaking the teachers union. You are complicit in getting in bed with these fly-by-night operators and excusing them and making common cause with them and working with Republicans to attack a public education. So I can't be a supporter, despite how good this individual school is among many. I worked in a charter school for 3.5 years, one run by Goodwill, Indianapolis Metropolitan High School, and it was a horrendous experience. I won't go into it here, but I was working over 70 hours a week. I had no teacher mentor as a 22-year-old. I was making up lesson plans for 7 different subjects, and no one was double checking my work to make sure that it was accurate. It was just total unsupervised chaos. I loved my kids. I worked really hard. I'm a smart enough guy, but it was a total disservice to the children. So that's kind of where I got my anti-charter bent. But yes, to your point, despite the fact that the actual constituents who vote in the Democratic primaries and vote for Democrats are very, very, very obviously in favor of public education, some of the top Democrats in terms of elected officials in the city are on the opposite side of that issue. And so, for example, caucus leader Maggie Lewis sits on the board of the Mind Trust. And in January, she, my peer Carlos Perkins, and Leroy Robinson, who we know loves me so much, all stood with former Indianapolis Mayor Greg Ballard, a Republican, on the steps of the State House saying, IPS is really poorly managed, charters are the future. Really, IPS should just go away. But if it doesn't go away, it should at least give away a ton of resources. It should start paying for buses for charter schools. It should start, giving away even more of its land to charter schools. And it should stop taking so much tax dollars, which I thought Okay, that's war. You're just straight up advancing a
You know,
Republican talking point.
at what point, if you are a Democrat and you're taking money from organizations that want to destroy public schools, at what point do you say you're not really a Democrat anymore?
That's the funny thing to me. To me, there's a stronger case for the people advancing this stuff not being Democrats than there is for me, because I don't take money from anybody, especially not from any Republican-aligned lobbying groups. So, but I didn't immediately vote or try to initiate a vote to expel those three. I just, tried to talk to my constituents, organize teachers, organize parents, and try to fight back against this. However, they escalated. So I got dozens of texts last Thursday and Friday morning saying, why am I getting these text messages? There was a text message campaign that said, stop the state takeover of IPS. And this was a well-produced, nice, polished graphic.
God forbid.
Right. And so I was like, oh, good, stop the state takeover. But then you read through it as IPS won't survive because the state's going to take it over. The only choice is to support Maggie Lewis, Carlos Perkins, and Leroy Robinson in calling for them to just give away all of its resources anyway. And so it was an incredibly misleading campaign. They used a URL that was one letter away from what IPS parents were using for their URL to self-organize. And it wasn't signed. It didn't say who paid for it. It was just this like scammy text that was designed to mislead people. But it used the names of my three peers. And so I reached out to them privately and said, hey, I have a huge problem with this. I'm getting a ton of messages from my constituents. This is using your talking points and it has your names on it. Like, are you going to denounce it? Like, what is going on here? And none of the three of them would say in writing, I didn't do this and I don't know what it is. They give you a lot of...
I'm gonna let everyone in on a secret. That's because they weren't against it. Okay, go ahead.
Exactly right. It was obvious, right? Like, that's the Occam's razor. I don't know how you could guess anything else, but I did them the courtesy of just letting them say it themselves, Yeah. They refused. They said, oh, just give me a call and I'll talk to you about this over the phone. In my 14 months in politics, I've already found out that if you talk to a politician on the phone, whatever they're telling you is a lie, or at least they're not very committed to it because they don't want anybody to be able to hold them to it. And so I said, no, this is pretty important. I'd really like this in writing. I was told, I'd like $1 million. Like, neither of us are going to get what we want. And so I said, this is like a huge concern and it's bothering my constituents. And they put a laugh react on the message. And so I said, okay, well, I guess we're not just being polite colleagues anymore. So I made a Facebook post and it just said, it was in response to one of my constituents raising the alarm about these texts. And I said, I suspect that these three, and I tagged them, I wasn't talking behind their backs. I brought them into the conversation and said, I suspect that they have something to do with this. I asked them privately if they did, and they did not deny it. Here I am asking them again publicly.
How much money have they got from these organizations? Have you looked into that?
I'm in the middle of finding that out. So through a DSA campaign, we are doing a program called Who Owns Indianapolis? And we are pulling down all the campaign finance reports and compiling it all and looking to see how much money everybody's gotten. The really sad thing is that for most of them, they've gotten very little money. It's just a couple $1,000s over their political careers, and yet they've still been hard on this issue. I really can't explain it. It just seems like if you're going to sell us out, you should do it for more money than that.
Right.
But, I didn't say they're sellouts. They hate children. They're working with Republicans. I didn't say that stuff. I just said, I suspect they have something to do with it as it has their names in it. I'm asking them to deny it if that's not true. I was sent a screenshot of that in the caucus chat. And earlier in the conversation, when I pushed them on some issues, they wouldn't elucidate and they wouldn't give more details. And they just said, I said what I said. And so I responded, what was that quote of yours? I said what I said. And then there was no further discussion until the next Monday. I walked into the caucus meeting room. We had an agenda for what we were going to talk about, but they had planned it behind my back that the first order of business was actually going to be to kick me out of the caucus. So I'm not going to say that I have not rocked the boat or have not been difficult to work with. That's certainly true. It's not been my intention to rock the boat in a way that bothers people. But I have a pretty clear mandate from my constituents to push for truth and justice. In fact, one of the people who made, a speech to try to convince people not to vote to expel me started with, Jesse can be a very irritating colleague. And I didn't have anything to say, but I was like, all right, fair enough.
Like that.
Right. But he still said, but he's principled. He means what he says. He doesn't do double talk. What he says in public is the same as what he says in private. And he really means what so I think we owe it to him to learn to work with them. And, and what I asked for as well, we have a long set of written rules in the caucus. There aren't any written rules that say don't ask people public questions that embarrass them on Facebook. There aren't rules that govern social media at all. And I said, if we make rules that democratically vote on them, then I will abide by them. But I can't obey your unwritten rules because that, doesn't serve my constituents. You have to, a friend of mine taught me this. He said, whenever he starts a new job, he talks to his boss and says, just show me the property lines, right? Because I promise you, I will spend all day dancing on the fence posts, but I'm not going to walk beyond that. Like, my job is to push the boundaries, not to violate the boundaries. And I always loved that. I was never given clear boundaries, and every time I asked for them, I was told I was playing games. So, yeah, that's kind of the short version.
Well, it's your prerogative to play games if you want. You're an elected official. And what was the final vote to kick you out and say you're not a real Democrat?
It was 13-6.
Okay, and you had 6 individuals that said, you're still a Democrat. What's your relationship with both sides now? What's Jesse Brown going to do now that you've been kicked out of the caucus?
Well, I'm just going to keep doing what I have been doing, which is fight for my constituents and fight for reform in our government and just to do the right thing for, middle class, working class people, which is not at all what's been going on in terms of policy from, frankly, either side of the aisle. I did raise my hand. I was like, hey, I just want to be clear as to what you're thinking when you're taking this vote, because which of my behaviors that you find irritating or upsetting do you think are going to go away or be quieter after this point? And they didn't have an answer to that. So, I've been doing a kind of media tour to kind of bring my side of it. I've noticed that for the most part, they have not shared any details about their decision. And I don't think they were expecting me to kind of fight so loud. But the one thing I'm not going to do anymore is give them any more time to give me the proper number of committee assignments. So this came up as well. They were intending on stripping me of all my committee assignments the day after that caucus meeting. And they had given public notice for a committee on committees assignments. Their explanation post facto was, there was a new Republican elected to their leadership. And so we had to just switch some committees around for him. But that new Republican was elected 6 weeks ago, and there had never been any urgency. You're not going to convince me that within 24 hours of when you voted to kick me out, you were also planning to remove me from committees, which is what they did to Stephen Clay, which is what they did to Ethan Evans. Anybody who's been run afoul of the leadership has had the same thing happen. So they're pretending that that's not what was going on. I think anybody with intelligence and a view of history knows that's not true. But all those people in the past kind of rolled over and went away quietly. I did not. So I mentioned to my constituents what had happened and said, hey, if you can be there, I think that, your presence in the room watching as they try to do this will change their minds. And they intentionally held the Committee on Committees meeting. And it's a public meeting. They had to give public notice. There are laws in this state that mean you can't do it behind closed doors. They still try to do it as much behind closed doors as possible. In a conference room that 5 people can fit in, I had 60 people show up wanting to watch and just weigh in on what happened. And so they changed their tune and said, we were never going to strip you of committees. That's not something we would ever do, of course. Or actually, they didn't say that. They said, that's not what this was about today. And so they didn't take my committees, which I'm really grateful to my constituents for standing up and fighting for me. However, even though I've been quiet about it, it's never been just or fair that I'm only on 3 committees compared to Republicans, 6 or 7. And so we're making this a public issue and not stopping that fight until I get my fair number of committee assignments. So that's the short term. In the long term, I will still happily work with anybody from any party who wants to work with me. I still plan on running for re-election as a Democrat. Those 13 people do not get to trump the 5,479 who voted for me to be in this office representing them as a Democrat. And so I'm sorry that they find it so frustrating to work with me. I'll still happily work with them, but I also won't pull any punches. And when I see bad behavior, I'm going to continue calling it out, maybe a little louder and more aggressively, since now there's no reason not to.
Yeah, I mean, why hold back when they've already decided that you're not one of us, which I don't think you ever claimed to be.
Yeah, no,
I mean, just talking to you here through this 45 minutes or so, it seems like you do kind of roll as your own person and don't try to be part of the Democratic apparatus there in Indianapolis. Because, setting up here by Fort Wayne, and someone who has run for office outside of Indianapolis, a lot of times the Democrat strongholds in the state, the few that there are, we kind of scratch our heads up here sometimes and just kind of say, what the hell are you thinking? because what you guys do down in Indianapolis and Bloomington and South Bend affect what we can do when we run for office outside of those mainstream Democrat strongholds.
Very true. And statewide races as well, right? So
Right.
one of my constituents is Destiny Wells. And it's very true that Destiny would have been our Secretary of State 3 years ago at this point, had Marion County even turned out to 2020 levels. We just didn't. We just didn't show up, and Marion County lost her that race. And again, this time against Todd Rokita for Attorney General, Marion County could have won her that race and didn't. It would have been a tougher swing this time around, but it was within the margin of the voters who stayed home just in this county could have won that election. So
do you expect the primary challenge in 2 years?
Yes. Basically, from the first month I was on the council, people were leaking to me that they already had an oppo file against me, that they were recruiting challengers, that they were raising money and were going to spend however much it took to unseat me. And so what I've always said is, please do.
F around and find out.
Right. That too. I put on a training last year, partly for Katrina Owens and partly for other candidates. It ended up being worse. It was not as well attended as I hoped because the training ended up, by luck, being on the same day as Senator Gene Bro's funeral. So a lot of people were at that, and rightfully so. But we still had 45 people show up and learn from some former Bernie Sanders staffers who I paid to come in and just prepare this whole Google Drive of resources on how to run an effective campaign, even if you don't have much money. It's the tactics I use to win and then some. And I have that as a free Google Drive for anybody who wants it, including if you want to run against me. So I think primaries are actually very healthy and necessary for a functioning democracy. And I hope I do get a primary challenger because I know I'm my own guy. I'm very different from a lot of other politicians. And if that's no longer what my constituents want, then I shouldn't be representing them. For right now,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, for right now, in the week since I was expelled from the Democratic Caucus on the council, I've gotten roughly 1,100 messages about that. And no joke, 3 of them said, hey, I don't know that you did the right thing. I think maybe you were too brash. Everyone else said, keep fighting. And so I'm going to keep fighting, right? And I'm going to run for re-election. Right now, I think I'll win very handily. But if I don't, and I'm no longer representing my constituents, then I will happily go back to the private sector and give all my tips, and I'll wish nothing but the best for the person who beats me.
And from where I sit, I see a lot of people that support the SnydeReport newsletter, people that support the podcast, people that support our efforts are a lot of the same people that support you down in Indianapolis. I look at the people on the other side that voted you out of the caucus, and I don't think I've ever talked to any of them, maybe 1 or 2. When people support this newsletter and this podcast, and I look around and I see that those are the same people supporting you, I have to believe that you're doing something right down there.
Thank you. Yeah. And again, that doesn't mean I'm not doing a bunch of things wrong too. Like, I'm a first-time politician. What I've been telling people is every single month, I try to do a retrospective for my time in tech, right? And I look back, I look at what was effective and what was ineffective and where I wasted my time. I was like, man, I knew nothing a month ago. I'm so glad I've learned so much since then. I was an idiot back then, and now I'm much smarter. I've said that every single month since being elected. So I'm on a good trajectory, but I'm still have a ton to learn. I'm not doing everything perfectly. I could use help and mentorship and advice, and most importantly, accountability. So when I'm screwing up, I ask my constituents, let me know. I told you, only 3 people out of 1,100 said I did something wrong. I'm trying to have coffee with all 3 of them to better understand where they're coming from, because negative feedback is much more helpful.
Good for you. And people that can take constructive criticism or feedback are the people that improve. And I tell people, if you tell me to go F myself, I'm going to go tell you to F yourself back. But if you say, if you could do this better, it might improve your product, then I'm going to take a look at it. I've got to wrap things up here. I like to think that I'm a pretty good interviewer and that I ask everything that should be asked. Unfortunately, I don't all the time. So is there anything that you wanted to discuss briefly that maybe I did not ask you?
I mean, we hit on all the big things. Yeah, I'm continuing to fight. IPS is still under attack. It's under attack from the city council. It's under attack from members of the school board. And it's under attack especially from the state house. I will be fighting back. Parents are organizing. Teachers are organizing. we're going to win this thing, but that's the short-term fight. We have to do better about public education funding in general, because people wouldn't have beefs with IPS, or they wouldn't even try to look at charter schools if we didn't give away all their tax dollars in tips and underfund IPS. So longer struggles there. All of this, there's always more stuff to be done. But yeah, no, I think we hit most of the things I'm working on right now.
How can people get a hold of you, stalk you, call you names, give you compliments, anything like that?
I am at Jesse for Indy on most forms of social media. I have a website, www.jesseforindy.com. I write a weekly to every 10 days, very long constituent newsletter. I think I've probably put out more written statements than the rest of the 25 counselors combined. I just really like being public and transparent, even if it's an opinionated thing that some people disagree with. I give my cell phone out to everybody. It's Jesse at jesseforindy.com. Would love to hear from you no matter whether you like me or not.
And I'm going to tell you that, outside of Indianapolis, and I think inside Indianapolis, you have a lot of people on your side, because a lot of people realize, the attack on public education is real. It's they want to dismantle public education. They want to make education a profit source for a lot of different private companies. And you do have a lot of support, maybe outside of those 13 people that decided you weren't a Democrat in good stand.
Yeah, I really do regret. I wish that all 13 of them saw me as a Democrat, and I wish that this vote did not go this way. However,
we see you as a Democrat, so I want to thank you for your time. We look forward to maybe having you on again. Maybe you can break that banjo out up there and show us what you got. It doesn't have to be dueling banjos or nothing like from Mumford and Sons or the Avett Brothers, but maybe Mary Had a Little Lamb or something.
Once I get that good, I'll let you know.
Jesse,
but
Brown,
no, I'd be honored to be back.
Thank you for being on the SnydeReport podcast.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Gary.
You're listening to the SnydeReport podcast. I am Gary Snyder.